and is a certified emotional hygiene coach. She has over 20 years of experience in leadership in the defense, aerospace, and offshore wind industries. In addition,
I'm seeing some nodding, so that's a good start. Very good. Okay, so today's presentation, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about leadership traps. And we're going to use a little bit of the techniques that we actually use in the Leadership for Social Change program anyway. And we're going to use a lot of breakout groups to get all of you as participants doing the work too, because ultimately, I don't think just listening to a lecture from me about leadership traps is going to be nearly as beneficial as you yourselves being able to identify what you have seen in the world around you already. And we'll have some discussion that sort of goes backwards and forwards on that. So, two core things that we're going to be discussing. One is the traps, and then the second piece is your own self-awareness and transformation approaches. Then we're going to look a little bit, give you some information on the Leadership for Social Change, Self-Awareness and Transformation course that's coming up soon. And of course, we're going to have a bunch of Q&A most of the way through. We'll do probably two different Q&A sessions. One will be around leadership after we've done breakout groups. There's lots of room for question and answer. And then we'll do the final Q&A primarily around any information that you want to know about the course moving forward as well. So I guess to set the scene, futurist Suhail and Ayatollah says that humanity is a bit like a bunch of teenagers with its infighting and its clans and groupism, and it has to really evolve to the next stage of adulthood. So then the question becomes, how do we help society evolve into adulthood? And that comes with a number of different approaches. One is perhaps more systemic, but the other one is very much more on the individual level as well. And it's to do with how we as leaders operate. Now, leadership is one way of looking at leadership is to think of it as what we do in the small, micro, everyday moments, because the overarching sense that people have about us, be it good or bad sense of our leadership, is usually a culmination of these small micro moments, such as everyday conversations, the decisions you make, how you handle conflict, how you handle the stresses. And so people will ultimately make a judgment, based on that, whether you're contributing in a masterful way or you're just unconsciously reproducing old patterns that perhaps no longer serve you anymore. And so with that in mind as a bit of a base, we're going to head into a breakout session soon. And if you have a camera or something, or a phone on you, I suggest you might want to take a screenshot or a picture of these questions, because I'm going to break you into groups of about 3 people. And these are the questions that I want you to explore. Or the question I want you to explore. But first, to have a think about the leaders that you've worked under. So not necessarily ones that are in the news that we haven't had direct experience with, but the ones that we've actually had direct experience of their behavior. And then for contrast, think about the ones that you admire versus the ones that you don't admire, and start to think about why. Like, what is it about their leadership style or their behavior that was problematic for you to experience, because that starts to point towards what the leadership traps might be. Have a discussion about that as a group and pick someone, excuse me, to be your, I guess, spokesperson. And then the spokesperson will then write into the chat a bit of a summary of the types of things that came up during that process for you. So if I can now ask Rishi to put everybody into groups, that would be fantastic.
All right, thank you, Satya. We have got the rooms assigned. Most of you will have 2 people in the room, and so what I'll be doing is moving around just to make sure if anyone's not available to participate in the room, that they're at least in a room where there are people who are available to participate. We're opening the rooms now. Please join. All right, Satya, looks like everyone's back from their breakout rooms. Welcome back, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So how did we all go? And I guess what I would like to ask you to do is, if for one of you who are in the group, to just jump into the chat and just start writing down, just in dot point, just a couple of the key things that tended to come up. But that way we can visually all see the types of topics that are coming up, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat about it. Empowerment, that's a good one.
Can you see the stuff I put in the chat when we were in the breakout group?
No.
Those breakout room chats are not here available. If you wouldn't mind
Okay, I'll just cut
sharing
and
that here.
paste them again. All right.
So Reka says, barriers to good leadership: ego, ability to ask for others' ideas, inability to attract others, okay, listening skills, good qualities, positive, inspiring, integrity, sense of humor, and connections.
Do you want the negative qualities too, or just the positive?
Yes, please. Yes, we're looking at the traps, but it's good to have the contrast, right? Ethical, inspiring vision, strategic thinkers who contribute to my thinking, applies ethics, team builder, rating to incorporate others. Negative qualities: not honest, put down workers, defending their own correctness, not hardworking, gets everyone else to do your work. Is anybody else contributing, or I'm just wondering if I should wait a little longer. Here we go for a couple more. Ensure participation and neo-humanist outlook. Admire those who set example, flexible, break the rules when needed, bring the best in other people, believe in people they lead, bring out the initiative in other people. Bad ones: hypocrisy, arrogance, know-it-alls, avoiding learning. Here's a good example: shows an interest in others' contributions and brings out others' strengths. Admire being humble, empathy, and responsible. Don't like the authoritarian types. There we go. Okay, I think that might be it. But if anyone else is typing, keep typing. When it pops up in the chat, I can read it out. So creating space for others is confident. So I'm just going to share my screen again for a moment. Won't be a second.
Oh, you've got a few more in the chat that are juicy.
Oh, can someone read them out?
Sure. Let's see. Humble, empathy, cooperative, intelligent versus know everything and distant. Here's a good one from Pashupati. Incompetent and doesn't know it. Don't admire, nasty, critical, selfish, don't know how to follow, impose the values on others, and unconsciously incompetent.
I think many of us have experienced that looking around the group. So what I'd like to introduce you to, this is actually just going back to the comments that were made earlier about a publication, the Neo-Humanist Review. I wrote an applied leadership piece for that. And so I'm going to ask Rishi to just put a link to that in the chat so that you can click on it and save it for some later reading. It very much shows the type of leadership philosophy that we operate with the course. But one of the points that I brought out in that particular essay is, and this is not an exhaustive list, but it's just one way to look at leadership traps, that when people have emotional dysregulation, so for example, getting angry unnecessarily at others, or making erratic decisions based on emotional states, for example, or even I've seen a lot of examples, because emotions are very contagious, right? So if you're extremely stressed and you're not really mindful of how your staff around you are receiving that, or if you don't shelter them from that, then they feel it too, and they will behave in the same way because they feel it from the boss. So it makes its way down, so to speak. Another one is ignoring our shadow sides. So these are the parts of us, if we tend to be very, let's say, task oriented, maybe we might have a tendency towards authoritarianism that we are a bit unaware of because we're being a bit too controlling, for example. And sometimes because we don't want to be seen as controlling, we just like block that out and say, no, I'm not controlling, but actually we are. And that's a little bit on the points that we sort of heard before about, and not aware of it, right? So the more aware we become of these types of things, and the more we shine light on it, it can be a little bit of a psychological process as well to do that. So learning how to have compassion, empathy for our shadow, embrace it, integrate it, have good humor about our quote unquote flaws, and to realize that perfection actually is not the goal either. Um, because life is messy, life is a bit of a journey. And actually, what makes us interesting are our imperfections, I think, on this human journey. Cognitive inflexibility. So this is, the inability to be able to make new connections. So some of it's to do with, I guess, a bit of a intellectual realm, but it's not just intellectual, it's also to do with a relational realm as well, right? So the more that we're able to see the context of something, the more we're able to see the relationship between in the network around us, then the more able we are to deal with volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments. Like, this type of thinking is very, very, very necessary for the future, because it's basically where the world is going. Things aren't so predictable anymore. So cognitive flexibility is one of the key things that's required from leaders moving forward. The ability to see patterns, to change, to have a bit of a plasticity in our brain, to learn, to grow, and continue our learning journey. Another one here is operating too much out of fear rather than trust. So, for example, in the behavioral models of leadership, I guess you could say there's roughly 3 core behaviors that tend to show up, and we typically all have a piece of that. I've never met anyone that doesn't have any of it, because it's human. And that's to have some degree of controllingness, being overly critical, or being overly pleasing. There's some element of that, or a combination of them, that we all tend to carry. And it's because they tend to be fear-based, patterns that we have. Whereas when we move into a trust-based environment, so control often comes from task-related, fear-based responses to the world around us. Oh, I don't like that uncertainty, so I'm going to control it, versus, yes, it's uncertain, but I trust in my team, so I'm going to empower them and do things in a slightly different way, so that shows up very, very clearly in the types of behaviors that we exhibit. Boundary confusion is another one of my favorites. The ability to stay in your lane, the ability to keep other people out of your lane, and sort of everything in between. A lot of us, don't grow up with this type of knowledge and are not well practiced in it. And what happens in our inner world, and the family environments that we grew up in, for example, tend to express in our leadership style. So learning to become really, starting to have a lot of awareness around these issues is really important, as part of our leadership journey. I want to open it up and just see, are there any questions about or comments about any of these topics that we've been discussing? And is there anything that anyone put in the chat that has not been covered under the umbrella of one of these topics that we could potentially explore?
Well, I didn't put it in the chat, but I think good leaders have this ability to hold, and you sort of got at it a little bit. If you trust the group and you trust what you've built in the group, then you're holding space and catalyzing their work, rather than having to be the person that tells everyone what to do.
Exactly. And often it can come down to, so we see this a lot. For example, I've seen it because I've done, executive coaching and things, over the years. You see that kind of thing, also very much in, like, people who were founders of a particular business or project that they had, right? It's their baby. And they also don't want to let other people to have control over their baby. And they're kind of a little bit scared to let it all go, because what if something's not perfect, And so there can be this perfectionist mindset that also holds them back from being able to delegate. That's one end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum is you've just got people in large organizations, for example, that it's not their baby per se, but they don't know how to operate other than in that really controlling way. They don't understand the delegation, or there might be a pleaser self preventing them to hand off work to others, or there might be a controlling self. The critical self can all sort of come into play with those things. It's a really good point.
There was a comment in the thread from Eugenio, spiritual intelligence is wonderful and rare, was his comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Eugenio, did you want to delve into that a little bit more and tell us what you mean by it?
Eugenio, if you would unmute and then we'll be able to hear you.
Sorry, I'm struggling with telephone, but yes, spiritually more intelligence I think is a rare and unusual quality. When you are working with someone who is aware of the transcendental part of existence without being disconnected from the material realm is really rare. But I think there are some leaders who manage that balance, and there are books on different kinds of intelligence, emotional intelligence, community intelligence, and I think the top of the cake, the cherry in the cake, is spiritual intelligence.
Thank you for that contribution. Yeah, it's an interesting field because it still is being understood. How do you quantify spirituality? But there's some really interesting thinkers out there that look at it in terms of ways such as the sense of purpose, the sense of direction, the sense of love that you can create, within a group and within a team, and to be aware of that. It's just some of the ways that they can show up in a more tangible way that we can observe and see in the world.
We had a couple comments in the chat, and then one person has raised their hand. So Pashupati writes, how do we get out of these traps once we recognize them? And Niti writes, leadership traps of those who don't have a neo-humanist view and speak from a limited perspective. And then Alberta has her hand raised when you're ready.
Okay, so to answer the first one, we're going to go into that in our next breakout session. So what was the second question in the chat again?
It was a comment that leadership traps of those who don't have a neo-humanist view and speak from a limited perspective. And then Alberta has her hand raised when you're ready.
Sure. I mean, what I would add to that, though, is that whether you're neo-humanist or not, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily well practiced in leadership. And so, particularly when you look at the behavioral elements, and also things like cognitive flexibility is something that is practiced and not necessarily based on our values. So whether you're neo-humanist or not, the need for leadership training and self-awareness and transformation is the same for everybody, because we're all starting at different points on the ladder based on our evolution and the experiences that we've basically had. So yeah, Alberta.
I actually might, I think I'm just going to end up building on what you just said, because I forgot to think about this leader that I experienced who played, I think he was promoted because he played poker with the CEO every Friday. And I was like so ready to not like this guy. And he was really a good leader. And he knew nothing about my area. But I'm going to say that he had all of the leadership characteristics that you're talking about. And so he didn't know anything about my area. He had this kind of, that's how he got, I don't know if that's how he got promoted, but certainly that would have been his reputation. But he was trusting, he listened to people, he operated out of trust, all of the things that you're talking about. And the fact that if you have good leadership skills, then you actually can be a leader of whatever. So that's probably my story or my promotion for leadership skills as a really great idea, regardless. of what
That's
you're
right.
saying.
Thank you very much. And just to then tie that back to the neo-humanism. So people can unconsciously have some neo-humanist approaches in the way that they make their decisions, or I would say maybe it's a humanist approach, depending on sort of where they come from. So a lot of people actually who are good leaders, I think, do instinctively have this sort of neo-humanist perspective. It may just not be so transparent in their minds. Pashupati, I can see, has his hand up as well.
How do you integrate these qualities with our President Trump, who seems to embody all of them and is still the President of the United States, and many consider him a good leader, and he's a very effective leader in many ways?
Yeah, that's a good point, because effective leadership doesn't mean ethical leadership, right? So Hitler was a very effective leader as well. So that's why an ethical base is incredibly important in leadership, because it's a bit like people talk about rationality, but rationality in relation to what? What is rational is in a business may not be what is rational for a family, may not be. It depends on the observer. And it's similar with leadership. So it all comes down to what's the overarching goal. So, for example, in our Leadership for Social Change course, one of the first things that we establish is a civilizational perspective, because then that gives a type of goal that we're moving towards. It shows the worldview that's guiding our decisions ultimately.
We had a comment here from Suveda. She writes, does it need a leader to be practicing, like playing tennis, to be a good one, to be a good leader that you might want to be? And Suveda, if you want to add to that, perhaps.
Did you say playing tennis, Ricky?
Yes, I think her point was kind of, is it like practicing tennis, where it's something you have to keep
I think.
working on to be a good leader?
Yeah, I think so, because it requires a lot of, and that's also the second thing that we learn in this leadership course is basically the art of self-development through a type of action learning loop that involves slowing life down, observing the little decisions, the little micro things that are happening in your everyday life to sort of understand where you're at. But it can be really overwhelming to do that. So we typically pick just one thing that we want to look at, and we practice it over and over for a few weeks, see what we learn, and then set the next goal. And that's based on this whole idea that development, like if I say become a better communicator, you can't. That's far too hard. It's too much of a big goal and a big step. But if I say, go set myself a goal of I'm going to watch my emotional reaction to when people are speaking to me and notice how many times I want to interrupt. That's something that's super concrete and observable, and I can actually observe that over a period of a few weeks and notice what happens. Like, oh, I typically want to interrupt about, I don't know, say 3 times in the conversation. How hard is it for me? And then maybe the next time I do another loop and I'm looking at, okay, how hard is it for me to actually not interrupt? And can I not interrupt? How do other people deal with that? So there's these little sort of micro loops that we can go through that build, if you think of it like a big network, and up the top it says communication skills improved, but then there's all these little sub pieces that make up those there's even down to like micro skills. So you work on these little observable micro skills, and eventually it starts to coordinate the abilities at this higher level, and sort of up it goes. So yes, it can be very, very practice based, but it also requires things like feedback, and also the emotional tolerance to be able to hear feedback, etc. All right. If there's no more questions, I can't see the chat. So Ricky, please let me know if there is anything else. But otherwise, we might head on to the next part of the session, which is looking at the whole idea of inner transformation. So this is getting to Pashupati's point, which is around what can you do about it. So if you go take a look at the essay, not right now, but later on, you'll see some of the things that I talk about in there. We don't go exactly into necessarily the specifics of, how in some detail, but it does talk to the idea that when leaders practice emotional mastery, shadow integration, boundaries, cognitive flexibility, and consciously work with fear and trust together, that the impact is immediate. So then they speak more clearly, they listen with more curiosity, they make fewer assumptions, they avoid unnecessary conflict, they delegate more effectively, they stay calm longer, they build trust faster, which obviously to be frank, this is actually the principles that the courses that we've developed under Leadership for Social Change are geared around. Some of it's behavioral, some of it's like new humanist values, but it's in particular our ability to slow things down and really look and understand what's going on the inside to be able to work on inner transformation techniques. And there's a number of ways that you can transform, but it depends ultimately what the challenge is. Sometimes it's just an awareness issue, and the moment you're aware of something, you stop doing it. Often, though, when we're aware of something, there's an emotional thing that goes on with that needs to be overcome, and suppressing it doesn't work. It's not just, I'm aware, now bang, it's all changed. My entire life and behavior has changed forever. That's usually not the case. Usually you have with these old protective patterns going on. So the activity that we're going to do next, and I encourage you to take a photo of these questions, because this will be the next discussion point, is when you are under pressure, how do you typically react? Do you get more controlling? Do you withdraw? Do you overfunction? Do you become critical? Do you avoid conflict, etc.? There may be many other things that aren't listed here. How does that reaction affect your team or cause? And if that pattern continued unchanged for 5 years, what would it cost you? What inner capacity would need strengthening to shift it? Now, one thing to remember is this is an activity of owning up to our shadow on some level. And some people like to think, oh no, but I'm completely perfect in the way that I do it. Almost nobody is completely perfect in the way that they execute leadership. So just try and be really frank with yourself about what do you notice in other people and how they respond to you in these sorts of situations. And then get ready. One of you in the group can once again be the spokesperson to say the types of issues that came up. We can keep it a bit more anonymous. It doesn't have to be about who exactly felt what, but just the headline topics that come up with this. Are the instructions clear for people? Or if they're not clear, can someone please just let us know and we can answer any questions before we go in? All right, looks like, okay, I'll hand back over to...
I know, please run it by us again.
Yeah.
The question and what to do, and how much time do we have?
You'll have 10 minutes again. And so you go, I guess, 5 minutes each, or just a conversation if it's just two of you. So when you're under pressure, how do you typically react? How does that reaction affect your team or cause? If that pattern remained unchanged for 5 years, what would it cost you? What inner capacity would need strengthening to shift it?
Clear. Thank you.
And
Very
I have
good.
put that in the chat as well. And I'll also pop into each of your rooms just to repost that. I'll be opening the rooms now.
Okay, so it looks like we're all back. How did you go? Maybe take a moment to just write a few things in the chat. And then once you've done that, if someone would like to volunteer to speak first, please do. Just to give us like a brief overview of maybe some of the interesting things that came out of the conversation, which might be a little bit different to what you write in the chat.
I see one comment here. Rika writes, feeling nervous can cause us to feel less confident of leadership skills. Important to work on remaining calm, as this actually affects the whole team.
Yeah.
Ada writes, when you're under pressure, blunt, short, withdrawal, silence.
Yep. And what's interesting is this is irrespective of whether you have an ethical base or not. It's just what happens to people when they're in that situation, right? So it's not necessarily that it's a bad intention or anything like that, is my point.
It's more personality based and, like you said, family of origin based.
Exactly. How to slow down and have self-reflection in order to build capacity, trusting the process you have been given, and that it does not all have to be solved by you. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Often just focusing on one aspect of our leadership, it's like the Pareto rule, right? Often if there's one area, if we can just sort of focus on that for a little bit, give it some attention, can completely transform our leadership. what they found in Google many years ago, because they would often promote the software engineers who didn't necessarily have leadership skills into the team lead positions, for example, they actually found that the fastest way to develop leaders was through feedback. So they brought in 360-degree feedback, like from the teams. And so, which is one of the reasons why it's really important as a leader to be able to receive feedback, particularly negative feedback from other people about your performance. It's also important to give and receive positive feedback as well in giant doses. But by being open to receiving feedback, by having a feedback culture, as they call it, which is different to just criticism, that's something else. What that meant was that leaders could very quickly identify where the issue was within their leadership style and just address it very, very quickly. And so it led, they could see in the results of the 360 reporting that in a very short period of time, or relatively short period of time, the leaders started getting really good results out of their 360-degree reports that came through. So this sort of coaching and 360 feedback approach is actually really important. It's not something we specifically do on the course. We're not, like, in the course, we don't assess your leadership capability because we don't know, but we're giving you some of the tools that help you in that endeavor. Should we read some of the other ones out here? So Didinanda Anuraga, overfunction that creates a lot of stress that also affects others, and asking more from others at those times. It can cause loss of valuable workforce in projects. Under pressure, and this is from Andala, under pressure, withdraw, humor awareness, being bolder, is that? Short directions, pressure on people. Vishwamitra says, tendency to withdraw when under pressure until can grasp what is going on in the group, try to bring out others' ideas and opinions to get bearing for contributing. Didi Anuraga says, overfunction that creates a lot of stress that also affects others, and asking more from others at those times. It may cause to, oh no, this is a repeat, sorry, of the earlier one. And then telling, we'll need to keep control on the mind at those times, telling the self to slow down and breathe. Okay, and then John says, can share via chat only. It feels nice being able to share openly and being listened to in the breakout room. I see leadership as listening and sharing. Oh, that's a really nice contribution there too. Does anyone else have anything else that they want to add in the chat? Feel free to keep doing that. Meanwhile, I want to open up the discussion a little bit. Is there anybody else that would like to comment on maybe some important insights that came out of the discussion that they had in the breakout rooms, and if there's something that you think is worthwhile sharing with the rest of the group? And if you don't, it's okay too, but I just want to give the space for it if that's wanted. I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to move us on. Ricky, I'm just going to go for, I've just got a few more slides to now just talk about the Leadership for Social Change course that we're running. So I'll just share my screen.